Tom Bower, the legendary royal author, is sharpening his quill for a new edition of his book set to reveal huge secrets inside Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's marriage.
A man who she abandoned for months to the media and now presents her mother, Doria, speaking for the first time, telling outright lies about her ex-husband. I mean, this was a calculated attempt against the families.
Meghan is a consummate survival actress. And you raised this extraordinary beginning of the year when she carved 2025 in the sand. And you know, it's a very, very interesting image that it came out on New Year's Day this year, because the previous weeks had been absolutely turgid and torrid for her. She had been dubbed Duchess Difficult again. There have been allegations of bullying.
Tyrant in high heels.
Very aggressive PR for the Sussexes, got way beyond herself because she really doesn't understand the British royal family or Britain, but understands how to project her clients. And so I think she got it wrong by leaking it or even letting anyone know about it.
I think personally, I think they've separated their professional lives, but I think what's really a great problem for them now, as of in the last few weeks, is that Meghan has got no real income anymore. She's finished.
2 days before the world knew Lilibet existed, someone registered a domain. Not after the announcement, not when the name went public, before. Before the Queen had even been told what her great-granddaughter would be called. The website was already locked, already secured, already ready for business. And that single detail tells you almost everything you need to know about what's really happening inside the Sussex operation. Tom Bower spent 2 years digging through the life of one of the most carefully constructed public images in modern history. 80 sources, hundreds of hours. And even his publishers couldn't believe what he found. What made it into the book was explosive. What didn't make it in, that's where things get genuinely unsettling.
So I choose people who don't want to be written about on the whole, whose lives are shrouded in mystery and they want to hide their secrets. And I just love digging away to find out what they don't want to say.
And in March, a second book drops. The one with the material he couldn't legally print the first time. So before that lands, let's go through everything. The suppressed chapters, the erased past. The pattern nobody wants to say out loud. Bower describes himself simply. He chooses people who don't want to be written about. People whose lives are shrouded in mystery. People who are hiding something. And Meghan, he says, is a consummate survival actress. That framing matters. Because survival implies threat. It implies constant calculation.
But what they need to do is face up to the blackmail that's coming from California and in some way or other undermine Harry's and Meghan's credibility.
And when you look at the timeline of her life, not the version she's told publicly, but the version Bower's sources piece together, the calculation goes back much further than most people realize. Before Harry, before the royal family, before Suits even made her recognizable, Meghan was already building something. Reports suggest she was actively staging paparazzi opportunities in London, positioning herself for cameras, engineering visibility.
And so he became hypersensitive and blamed the media for the crashes of his relationships, never thinking that they could have something to do with himself. So he's a very complicated, depressed, unintelligent man who is seeking a role and has got really nobody on whom he could rely, which is in the end where Meghan stepped in. I mean, a needy man met a woman who could help him with his needs.
The same woman who would later describe the press as a source of trauma was, according to Bower's research, practically begging photographers to notice her. And when they did shoot her, she later claimed she never wanted the attention. Bower called it, very politely, a tissue of inaccuracies. This isn't a small inconsistency. This is the foundation of the entire public narrative cracking before it even gets started. Then there's Soho House. If you want to understand how Meghan went from cable TV actress to royal wedding in what felt like record time, this is where the story actually begins.
Tom, do you think Harry and Meghan are fast learning what they signed away when they took this Netflix big moolah? And I would say they signed away their credibility and their dignity.
Well, that's our view, but it's not theirs. They need the money, and they need it now more than ever because they've got no other source of income. So I think they're just stuck with the devil now. They're tied to Netflix, they're tied to their book, and all the criticism they're going to take means nothing because that's the only way they can earn their money.
Soho House isn't just a members club. It's a network, access to rooms, people, and opportunities that most people never get near. And Meghan, insiders say, was deeply embedded in that world long before Harry appeared. Marcus Anderson, a Soho House director, reportedly played a significant role in opening doors for her, giving her access to circles she otherwise wouldn't have entered. And the numbers back this up in a way that's hard to dismiss. At her wedding to Harry, 60 Soho House members were in attendance. 60. For a woman whose public profile at that point was a mid-level television role, that is not a normal social circle. That is a cultivated network, built with intent, built over years. Some believe she never intended to stay in the royal family long-term. That the title, the connections, and the platform were always the goal, and California was always the destination. That's speculation, but 60 wedding guests from one private members club is not speculation. That's a guest list. Now back to that domain. June 2021. Harry finally calls the Queen. Gran, we've named her Lilibet, the Queen's own private nickname. The name Prince Philip had called her for 70 years. According to Bauer's sources, the Queen was not pleased. Not because of the name itself, but because of how it happened. Harry didn't ask, he announced. And by that point, the domain was already registered. The commercial infrastructure was already in place. 2 days before that phone call, Harry spent 30 years inside an institution where commercial branding never crossed his mind. He doesn't think in domain names. He doesn't think in brand ecosystems. But Meghan has been thinking in exactly those terms since she was a teenager. The blog, the networking, the image curation. A royal baby's name, using the Queen's own personal nickname, is commercial gold. Merchandise, media rights, brand recognition built on the most famous family in the world. When the BBC reported that Harry hadn't actually received the Queen's blessing before going public with the name, lawyers came out immediately with legal threats. But here's what's revealing about that response. If you genuinely had permission, you don't threaten journalists. You call Buckingham Palace, they issue one sentence of confirmation, and the story dies in 24 hours. Instead, there were legal threats. And from the palace, deafening silence. The BBC stood by every word. Harry's team never produced a single piece of evidence that permission had been given. The Hollywood chapter of this story was supposed to be the triumphant second act. Walk away from the royal family, land in California, and let the deals roll in. That was the plan. And for a brief moment, it looked like it might work. Netflix, Spotify, the promise of A-list access and creative freedom. But what actually happened is one of the more dramatic professional collapses in recent celebrity history. Spotify is gone. A deal worth tens of millions, dissolved after one podcast series that industry insiders described as underwhelming. Netflix is still technically in the picture, but the projects have underperformed and the relationship has narrowed significantly. The Hollywood doors that were supposed to swing wide open, many of them stayed shut. And the ones that briefly opened, some have quietly closed again. Bauer points to a specific dynamic. Certain A-list celebrities have stopped returning their calls, not because of scandal, because of strategic calculation. These are people who operate globally, who have relationships with the royal family that carry real value. State dinners, charity patronages, international access that elevates a brand in ways no Netflix deal can replicate. Being too visibly close to Meghan and Harry creates awkwardness with the palace. And that awkwardness has a cost that serious people aren't willing to pay. Then there's the British Vogue episode. Meghan guest-edited an issue. Should have been a moment of genuine cultural influence. Instead, reports suggest she behaved less like a guest editor and more like she owned the publication. The actual staff, according to people familiar with the situation, were quietly furious. Edward Enninful, one of the most celebrated editors in fashion history, later described the experience as something he had done and wouldn't necessarily repeat. That is industry language for never again. And when someone who works with the most demanding personalities on earth says that about you, it says something. The new book is where this all converges. Bauer has hinted, carefully and consistently, that there are details from Meghan's past that would have caused an absolute firestorm if they'd made it into the first edition. He's referenced allegations around exclusive private gatherings, the Mediterranean circuit, wealthy men, very private events. He's mentioned that there were things about her personal life that he removed specifically because UK privacy laws are brutal. You don't publish certain allegations without ironclad evidence that would survive a courtroom. And even then, the legal exposure can be catastrophic. So those chapters came out. Everything that remained passed rigorous legal scrutiny. But Bauer still has the research. He still has the sources. And Revenge 2 *, which publishes in March, is described as containing what he couldn't include the first time. The gap between Meghan's carefully maintained public image and what Bauer's 80 sources actually told him is, by his own account, significantly wider than what he was legally able to print. A past that was carefully managed, connections that predate Harry by years, a pattern of behavior that, once you see it, reframes almost every public moment since. Here's the thing that pulls all of this together. The domain before the phone call, the paparazzi she claimed to despise but reportedly sought out, the 60 Soho House members at the wedding, the professional relationships that have quietly burned out, the book that had chapters removed, the second book coming in March with what the first one couldn't say. Bauer's conclusion is pointed. This is someone who calculates every move while presenting it as authentic truth, who systematically isolates their partner from everyone who might offer a different perspective, who reshapes facts to generate sympathy. And Harry, in Bauer's assessment, is a complicated, deeply unhappy man who needed someone to give him direction. A needy man who met someone who understood exactly what he needed and exactly what she could get in return. The royal title was supposed to be the ultimate asset. Instead, it's looking more and more like the thing that made everything else harder. The brand nobody else wants to back. The platform that's shrinking. The story that keeps requiring new revelations just to stay relevant. And in March, the next chapter publishes. The one with the material too sensitive for the first time around. Whatever is in those pages, one thing is already clear. The gap between the public image and the private reality is the whole story. It always was.